like to start. So after that delicious lunch, I hope that you can stay awake. So, well, it's a good sign that I've got people in the front row, you know. So normally Wynne struggles to get people in the front row. So I'd like to know, before we start, I'd like to know who we've got in the room. Okay, so let me see, hands up. Who of you are working in IT? Okay. Who of you are working in the rest of the organization? HR, sales, marketing. Okay, so it's about half-half. Any leaders in the room? Any organizational leaders in the room? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I need my clicker. So first of all, I feel really blessed to be with you today. Oh, and this is gonna, something, is that me? Is that there? Yeah. Okay, earrings off. Okay, you see, I looked pretty for you. Okay, now we're going to be practical. Right. So it's really a miracle that I'm here. I arrived this morning at 5 o'clock. I blame it on Brexit, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's really nice for me to see so many people in the. It's my first time in Turkey, and it's really nice for me to see the interest in Agile in Turkey. So I want to take you on a little journey today. Okay, but first I want to start with how did we actually get here? Because Agile's been around for quite a long time. It's been around for over 20 years, you know, and a lot of people that I know have only very recently, in the rest of the organization, heard about organizational agility. So I'm going to share my own personal journey with you, not because I think it's something out of the ordinary, actually because I know that it's not out of the ordinary. So I started quite early on with XP. I was a technical team member, okay? And I then, you know, I was in the team, we were building software, we were building a product. So around in about 2001, I went across to the States to go work there, and I was very surprised that people there hadn't heard of anything like Agile at that point. There wasn't even an Agile manifesto, but there was incremental and iterative, okay? So around in about 2005, I stopped working in teams directly and became an Agile mentor, because now people were really getting interested in Agile. And there wasn't even the title of an Agile coach at that point. I carried on working with individual teams until about 2009. So up till that point, I had only been, people would say, oh, we're going to build a new product. I'd like to use Agile to do it. So 2009 is when I first started working with permanent teams that were just building, you know, just working, enhancing existing products, etc. Okay? So in 2010, I worked with 2 teams in the same department. And kind of 2011 was a turning point for me, because I got back to those 2 teams, and where I left them the previous year, all, you know, fired up, really going well. Half the people in the teams in 2011 were gone, and the other half were so frustrated that they could pull their hair out. Okay? And that's when I realized, okay, it's not only about the way that we work, it's not only about inside our team, it's got to do with the bigger ecosystem. So at that point, I started working with departments and managerial, you know, managers inside the departments to look at what happens inside departments. And pretty soon, we ran into the same problem. Inside the department, they could only go so far, and then they ran into the barriers in the bigger organization. So in 2014, I was very fortunate to attend one of the very first enterprise Agile courses in the world in the US, and I'll share some of the learnings with you today. And that's when I realized, okay, this is where the problem lies. And that was, I'm now an enterprise agile coach. That's what I've done ever since. At this point, I haven't worked with teams for quite a long time. I mostly work with leadership teams and with the bigger organization. Okay? So what did I learn in 2014? So what was shared with me was a model. So some of you may have heard of Lisa Atkins, the author of Coaching Agile Teams. Her company, she worked with two really brilliant guys. The two Michaels, Michael Hammond and Michael Spade. And together, they came up with a way of looking at Agile in the organization that's really useful. So it's a good, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I'm sharing a useful model with you. So it starts out, all good models have 4 quadrants. So first, let's look at, on this side, there's the I experience, the subjective experience. This is what I experience, okay? That is what can be observed. What can we look at and say, yes, that's true, or no, that's not true, okay? And then we divide those two things up in personal and collective, okay? So over here, I've got the I quadrant. The I quadrant refers to mindset and engagement. And the we quadrant, the collective, the we quadrant refers to culture and relationship, okay? Over there, in the observable, the objective, competencies, practices, and products, okay? And in the collective, organizational architecture and environment, okay? So this is known as the integral agile model. So how does this look in an organization? Well, in the mindset and engagement, we've got leadership, personal responsibility, change resilience, engagement. So some of us we all tend to have a slant for one of the quadrants. So some of us have a slant for the I quadrant. So when we look at agility in our organization, we're going to look at, are the leaders in on it? Okay? Do we have engaged people? Are people change resilient? Do they take personal responsibility? I mean, we want to do all these things with self-organizing teams. Well, you can't do that if people just say, well, I'm not going to take responsibility for anything. Okay? So that's what we look at in the I quadrant. What's important in the we quadrant? The culture and relationships. Okay? The values, the company values. What's our organizational culture? What's our norms? Do we have psychological safety? Do we have systems thinking? In other words, do we look at the big picture instead of honing in on little bits? Okay? Is there collaboration? Is it a collaborative environment? In the IT quadrant, I'm running through these quite quickly. Okay, there will be one slide with all of them on. Running through these, but it keeps you busy, so you don't fall asleep. Excuse me. So in the IT quadrant, the observable personal quadrant, that's really where things like Scrum play in. So if you think about skills and techniques, technical practices, that's really a lot of people, when we say we're going to go agile, we're going to roll out agile, I hate that term, that's really what we're thinking about. Let's create some new roles, product owner, scrum master, okay, team. Let's make sure that that people need to know what they're doing. Let's make sure that we have stand-ups and boards, etc. So that's what sits in the IT quadrant, okay? In the IT quadrant, we look at things like the end-to-end value stream, okay? What does the organizational structure looks like? The organizational altitude. Has anybody here read Frederic Laloux's Reinventing Organizations? Okay, so good book for you to read if you are working with organizational agility. Reinventing organizations, okay? So that's where the idea of organizational altitude comes from. Okay? What's the governance structures look like? What's the physical environment look like? Okay? So we need all of this. We need all of this for organizational agility. Okay? And depending on who you are, you will have a preference for one or two of the quadrants. So we very often find that coaches have a preference for the I and the we quadrants. Okay? Process people tend to have a preference for the it quadrant. Okay? And very often this is in the hands of the leadership. Okay? All of this needs to change if we want to become an agile organization, or like we prefer to say, an organization with increased agility. Okay, because agile has become kind of a swear word, you know. So that kind of brings us to the first myth. Okay, so having seen that, the first myth is that we can be agile as an organization if we only make our IT department agile. Okay, so it's a little bit, if you only make your IT organization, or your technical part agile, which is where it started in the beginning, I'm not quite sure why, but if you only make them agile, it's a little bit like having a Ferrari that's surrounded by a flock of sheep. Okay? The Ferrari can go forward and backwards really fast, but it can't really go anywhere because the rest of the organization is not able to move as fast. Okay? So that was the problem. You know, the problem in my teams and every single team that I've worked with since, that was the first problem. The problem was that we thought we could localize agility. Okay? In Lean, we actually get taught that if you optimize only a part of a value stream, over time you will sub-optimize the whole. Okay? So I'd like you to take a moment and just turn to the person next to you and just have a chat about, where does agility lie in your organization right now? Where do people think they have to become agile? Okay, some laughs already. So turn to the person next to you and just have a brief chat about that. Okay, so you guys know this. At big conferences, if you see somebody hold up their hand, okay, and they're quiet, hold up your hand and be quiet as well, because people can see better than they can hear. So, a trick for whenever you do large-scale facilitation. So, I'd like to hear from one or two of you. Where are your challenges at the moment in terms of organizational agility? Which areas? Is it confined to IT?
Most of the time when we talk about agility, they say this is not my stuff.
It's not my stuff.
This is related to IT, development, test.
Yeah.
Me as an HR, marketing, sales, nothing to do with Agile. We are Agile enough, they say.
Yeah. Okay. Similar experiences? Who's got a similar experience to that? So one hand. What about the rest of you? Come on, I heard you talking.
Not believing in the value Agile will bring.
Not believing in the value Agile will bring, yeah. Okay, so in the bigger organization, okay. And how about in the IT? It will bring value in IT or not in general?
I mean,
okay.
Value needs some time
yeah.
and patience, but
yeah.
sometimes, people are not that patient.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes people are not that patient. Value, to show value, especially if it's an organizational-wide effort, it takes time, and sometimes people are not patient. How about you?
I think the main problem lies on that the concept of agility is usually associated with the project management, and they are considering that, hey, Agile is just a project management
yeah.
for IT,
yeah.
and I totally agree with you. They are not internalizing the values
yeah.
or cultural or psychological background of it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's easy to discuss for them. And Agile means change, and change always causes frictions.
We do hate change, absolutely. We do hate change. Okay, so that you know what's happening in the rest of the world, so you are not unique, okay? I'm sorry to say. It's very special, but not unique. So in the rest of the world, that awareness is growing as well. Okay, if we really want to reap the benefits that Agile is promising, we really need to look at the entire organization. So about a month ago, I was at the Business Agility Conference in New York City. So business agility and organizational agility, if you define it in the integral way, are basically the same. Okay. So what was very interesting for me, it's the third year that they've held that conference. And by the way, there is one in Vienna coming up, business agility. The focus was mostly on HR and on finance. So that's the areas where at the moment there seems to be enough momentum building for people to start thinking about organizational agility in a different way. Has anybody heard about Agile People? There's a book called that. And there's a movement called Agile People. Okay, that's an example of where work is done. Agile People Conference is once a year in Sweden for HR people. That would be a really good one to go to. Okay, for people in finance, the budgetless society. I mean, have you ever heard such a preposterous thing, budgetless? We're not going to budget anymore. Okay, well, that's actually a reality. And the budgetless society has not been around only for a year or two. It's actually been around for quite a long time. So there are patterns in other organizations, other areas of the organization, where there's much more agility than currently. Okay, so that's myth number one. Okay, so now we know organizational agility involves everybody in the organization. Okay, so myth number two, increasing their agility should be the aim for every organization. Okay, surely that can't be a myth. Does anybody want to hazard a guess why I consider that to be a myth?
What is the value?
Where's the value? Absolutely. So Agile is always the answer to a problem. Okay? So most organizations, they would like to become more agile because they'd like to get products to their customers quicker. They would like to deliver faster in general. They'd like to increase their productivity. They'd like to improve their quality. There's always a reason. Okay, now, we're in the state of the late adopters with Agile at this point. So the banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, they jump onto the bandwagon. And for a lot of those people, the only message that they have in their head is, I have to become more agile. Okay, so Agile becomes this kind of silver bullet. It's going to fix all the problems. That's not what it is. Agile is a really good tool for coping with complexity. We live in a very complex world at this point. It's a really good tool for coping with complexity. Okay? It is not a silver bullet, and it's not going to fix everything. So if you're focusing on increasing agility, it's a little bit like the tail wagging the dog. Okay? We're not looking at what is it doing to the actual problem that we originally wanted to solve with it. We're just looking, how many people have we put through training? How many projects are currently agile? You know, how many, you know those stats in an organization that measures their agility? Measuring agility is pointless. Okay? So what you should be measuring is, how well are we doing with regards to that problem that we wanted Agile to solve? And that is what the aim should be. Okay, so that's myth number 2. And you know what, when I can't see my screen, I don't know what discussion questions I have for you. So I'll have to go look. So I want to have a show of hands. Who is currently implementing SAFe? Okay, one person. Who's heard of SAFe? Okay, so quite a few people. Okay, so in the US, I do a lot of work with enterprise coaches in the US as well. In the US, and now in South Africa as well, SAFe has started to become the answer. Okay, if you want organizational agility, you need to roll out SAFe. So, what's the problem with that? So first of all, let me say I'm SAFe trained as well. And actually, I read Dean Leffingwell's books before he even came up with a whole framework. And I thought the ideas were really useful. And to this day, I use some of the ideas. The problem is that if we roll out something like SAFe, which has roles and a process and responsibilities and artifacts, it's a little bit like, oh, hang on, let me tell you about that first. It's a little bit like putting lipstick on a pig. Okay? So I want to share this slide with you. So if we look at Scrum, for instance, Scrum is a set of practices that's built on principles and values, both from the Agile Manifesto, as well as its own. It's got its own values and principles, which is very closely linked to the Agile Manifesto. Underneath all of that sits a mindset. Okay? When we do something like roll out Scrum without changing the underlying mindset, especially from leaders, what we're doing is we're putting a bunch of practices in place without making sure that those values and principles are deeply understood. Okay? So then what happens is management sees it as a new way of working. You know, we're now going to do this, 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 and this. Okay? And furthermore, we start doing things in a different way without really understanding why. Okay? So that means that we can't change our way of working dynamically as we go forward. Isn't that one of the big things in Agile? Is that we change our process the whole time to make sure that it fits the way that we work. Okay? So it's not the framework that's the problem. It's the mindset of the people who request the framework to be rolled out in their organizations. That is the problem. Okay? If that mindset's fine, by all means, go SAFe, go LESS, go any one of the big scaling frameworks. But get the mindset right first. And then you'll probably find that you're not going to want to roll out a framework, but you're going to let your way of working evolve from your people themselves. Okay, so that leads us into the next myth. Okay, so who of you have seen that little cartoon? Okay, so I'd like you to once again have a discussion with the people next to you about what is the role of organizational leadership in your Agile transformation effort at this point. Okay, and if you're a leader yourself, share. Okay, so what's the role of leadership in your organizational transformation? Let's have a brief chat. Okay, so let's go back for a minute. Magic's magic. So let's go back to the integral agile framework for a minute. Which of those things that you see there that needs to be in place for an agile organization, which of those things can be done without involvement, in some cases serious involvement, from organizational leaders? Yeah, not much. Maybe technical practices, okay, which, by the way, has been neglected for years. It's picking up again, but technical practices in IT. But apart from that, most of those things are reliant on serious involvement from our organizational leaders. Okay? So I work with a guy called Simon Powers, and this comes from our work together. So really, this is a summary of how organizational agility grows. It has to start with the leaders. Okay? It has to start with the leaders. Leaders have to make some changes in structure. And structure is not only organizational structure. Okay? It's in, it's kind of the right-hand side of the integral model, the it and the its, which will have an influence on culture, which will once again feed into it's a reinforcing loop. Okay? So the role of leaders is so vital that it is the #1 reason organizational agility efforts fail. And here's the big thing. For leaders, the higher up you sit in the hierarchy, the more difficult or the bigger the changes that you have to make. Okay? If you've worked your way through a certain number of years to be in a position using an old way of doing things, okay, that used to be the right way of doing things. And we now come with this whole idea of empowered teams and making decisions at the level that the work happens, and creating flatter hierarchies, etc. That's a big ask. I've worked my way to the top using what was in place. Now you're asking me, when I am at the top, to just let go of it. So personally, I find that the biggest challenge, the people that are the most challenged when we do organizational agility, are the leaders at the top. Okay? So they really need our support, they really need our understanding, and they need education about how to do things differently. So that will bring about the culture change that we need to bring about in order to spread the love around and do the thinking where the work happens and not only right at the top. So I don't know if you've heard about ING Bank. We've heard about very successful transformation at ING. So this is what, this comes from a talk by Leonore Koerman, who was the chief, she was leading the transformation effort, and this is what they had to give up. Okay, so this is what they were willing to give up. And if I look at these things, it's not trivial. Let go of the belief that they were the most knowledgeable about their business. Wow. No, that's quite a lot to ask. So what we're asking people to do at a leadership level is non-trivial and very, very hard for them. Okay? So, and a little bit more about that. The next one. You don't need to change your organizational structure. Okay, now this is a really scary one for us. Okay? Because generally organizational change means job losses, have to report to somebody different, have to report to maybe into a group of people, work with a group of people that I don't necessarily know or like. Okay? This is change with a big C. And like we said earlier, we hate change. By the way, the day after I put up that slide, the Facebook structure changed. And the reason why I particularly put up the Facebook structure is because I went to a really interesting talk by Kent Beck. So you guys know Kent Beck? He's one of the original 17 authors of the manifesto. So, and he was working at Facebook at the time. And at Facebook, there is basically no structure. Because there you can see Zuckerberg and people, you know, the people who are responsible for those platforms. Here's the thing, at Facebook, everybody's responsible for everything. So, so Ken Beck tells the story. He was going with, you know, with his wife to some kind of craft conference somewhere in the States. And when he was there, he heard that, or somebody overheard that he was from Facebook. And the woman walked up to him and said, "You lost all my data." And in Facebook, whether it's your problem or not your problem, it's your problem. So he went and he researched what had happened with this woman's data. Of course, Facebook didn't wipe out all her data. What had happened was the last update from Facebook was the last thing she noticed before her hard disk drive crashed. Okay? But that's a really good example of being in an organization where there's no strict hierarchy. So what generally happens is this is where we start. We start with a traditional hierarchy. Okay? Then we start doing Scrum, and now we've got Scrum teams at the bottom of the traditional hierarchy. Now we realize, whoops, we need to scale it. So then we go to Scrum of Scrums, okay? And that's very often where we get stuck, you know, because there's the person at the top, so you get stuck there. So there are alternatives to this, okay? And one of the alternatives that we can look at is holacracy or sociocracy, they're related. That looks at different organizational structures, a different way. So we call this leader-full teams. It's not that they are leaderless, okay? It's not that there's no leader. It's that whoever has the capacity and is the right person for what's happening right now, they step forward, okay? They take the lead, and others follow because they respect the knowledge that this person has or the time that this person has sometimes. Okay? So we see this in a lot of smaller organizations. And of course, it's a challenge to grow it in the bigger organizations. The biggest challenge in this, of course, is the fact that if I was sitting at the top, when, you know, so some of the really advanced organizations, they don't even have a CEO position anymore. So it takes a really big man or woman to relinquish that position and say, I am no longer at the top. I am really trusting in the wisdom of the people that work with me. And we find that there's a, you know, that there's a loss of status that's very hard for people to handle sometimes. Okay? Whether it's a loss of informational status, I know the best, or of history status, I've been here the longest. It's really difficult to give it up. Okay? So what do we do about it? I can tell you what we don't do about it. Don't not do. Okay? We don't ignore it. It's real. It's real that if we go to a flatter structure, we may have people that used to coordinate work that don't have much to do. Okay? So we need to work with those people to find out how to reignite their passion in what they once wanted or what they now wanted, and find another way or another place for them. This is not easy. So I want to share with you Craig Larman, who is one of the two fathers of large-scale Scrum less. He's got some laws about organizational behavior. Okay? And basically, it says that it's really hard. Okay? So, unless people really develop themselves, really go for their passion, they'll find a different way to sustain what was there. So it's another case of lipstick on the pig. You know, I'm still doing, my sphere of control is still as big as it used to be. I just do it from a different place. So that obviously is also not what we want. We want people to authentically find a way to contribute to the organization. You know, for most of us, it used to be I was this close to the product that I was delivering to customers. In small organization, it's still like that. So my actions is very clear when I look at the impact that it has on people. In larger organizations, whether you come to work today or whether you don't, is your customer going to notice? Okay? You're so far removed from your customer. So what we're trying to do in an agile world is bring, you know, make that gap much closer, much smaller. And part of what helps people find a new way of being in an agile organization is looking, how do I actually contribute to my customer? Right. So, myth number 6, organizations should define a to-be state and a plan to get there. So you know that transformation plan? That's the single biggest reason why enterprise coaches go grey. Okay, we get asked to come and help, and the very first thing we need to do is we need to come up with a plan. How are we going to get there? You know, how's it going to look? So at the Business Agility Conference, I listened to a speaker. At the Business Agility Conference, by the way, they only tell stories. They just tell you what's happened in their organization. Okay? So she's one of the big investment houses in America. They invest the money that comes in through Social Security. So it's billions. And they've started a rather successful organizational transformation in one area of their business. And they reckon, given how long the first bit has taken them, it's going to take them upwards of 20 years to get the whole organization agile. Okay? So is that shocking? Who of you have got deadlines of the next 2 years? Hands up. In the next 2 years, we want to be agile. There we go. Okay? There is no way that you can predict what happens when you start changing an organization. You know, so I said earlier, it's a miracle that I got here. Well, my story is that I applied for, in South Africa, if you're South African, you have to apply for visas for everything. Okay? So I applied for a UK visa because I do a lot of work in the UK 5 weeks ago. It normally takes about 7 days. Guess how long it took? 5 weeks. Okay? So I nearly missed the conference as a result of that. I was supposed to train in London on Monday to Wednesday. Now, that's got nothing to do with me. You know, Brexit and the fact that things are changing in the government's got nothing to do with me, but it's got an impact on me sitting right over there. So you can never predict, because we are working in complex adaptive systems, you can never predict the impact of your actions. We can only look backwards and say, right, so from a cause and effect point of view, if we look at this effect, that's what actually caused it. Or that change that we made over there, oh, this is what's happening over here. So to try and plan all of that up front is futile. So organizations work much better if they let the change happen organically, because in order to become a more agile organization, your entire organization has to change. Every single person in it has to change. Okay? So If I take you back to my own storyline and I show you what had happened in the world around and about the same time. So in 1996, Scrum and XP came about. In 2001, the Agile Manifesto. Okay? In 2005, a whole new career emerged as a result of the whole Agile movement, the career of Agile coach. Nobody could have predicted when they started developing software in a different way. Nobody could have predicted that we're going to have a whole new career. Nobody could have predicted that actually we're going to look at business in a different way. Nobody could have predicted that eventually we'll think about the whole enterprise improving their agility. Okay? So here's the thing. If you start with an experiment in some part of your organization, in order to solve a problem, how about solving that problem, conducting that experiment, and then seeing where are we now? What's the next thing that needs doing? What's the next most difficult problem we have to solve? The next most impactful problem? Okay, let's solve that. How about then? So using an experimental approach to bringing in change in general is much more effective. It's much less impactful on the people in the change, and you've got a lot fewer moving parts. So you can actually identify, this is what works in my organization, this is what doesn't work. Because otherwise what we're trying to do is we're just trying to implement Agile in a waterfall way. You know, let's plan the whole thing up front. Okay, and then let's roll it out. Okay, sounds pretty waterfall to me. Okay, right. And that kind of brings me to the last myth. So, if you've got a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. Okay? So Agile coaches, when they are confronted with organizational agility, will bring Agile to it to solve it. Okay, so we're struggling, let's do more collaboration. Okay, we're not seeing results, let's look at the value that we're trying to bring. Okay, that's all fine and well. That is the job of an Agile coach. But that's not going to get you as an organization where you need to be. So in my own journey, I've had to borrow from quite a few other disciplines. So I started out as a software developer. I'm now a certified coach, a professional coach. I'm educated in facilitation, large-scale facilitation, in all sorts of change techniques, how to facilitate change, etc., etc. And everybody that I know has done the same thing. You don't have to do that. It would be useful for you to know a little bit about other domains. But these are the domains that you need to have a look at. That without these, you will never be able to bring about organizational agility. If you don't know how to develop leaders, okay, you're never going to get there. Because you're never going to affect the organizational leaders at the top. If you don't know how to do professional coaching, you're going to be stuck in that organization. Maybe that's your aim. But you're going to be stuck in that organization having to tell people what to do and fixing stuff the whole time. Okay? You'll never get them to get some of those capabilities. If you don't know organizational development, the theory of organizational development, you're not going to be able to help people come up with structures that works given what the new environment looks like. Okay? So, by all means, go and get some knowledge about this. Please don't do what a lot of Agile coaches do and go and do a week-long course in organizational development and then consider yourself an expert. Okay? We'd rather work with these people. We know cross-functional teams in Agile. How about coming up with a transformation team that includes expertise from all of these areas? Because not only will you come up with a better solution than one of you by yourself, you will also be able to educate one another. Okay? So you will walk away with more skills, knowledge, understanding. They will walk away with more skills, knowledge, understanding. Okay? And another thing, while we are while we are about that, you will never be able to work with organizational leaders as a coach if you do not develop your own leadership. Okay? That doesn't mean that you have to rule and regulate over a whole bunch of people. It means that you have to develop yourself in terms of what is the place that I come from when I act. It's a difficult journey because it's a personal development journey. But if you're not willing to go through that, okay, how on earth are you going to support and have empathy for people? Your organizational leaders have to go through that. Apart from the fact that your impact on them will be so much more less. So much more less. Okay, that's not good English. Okay. So much less. Okay? So you really have to look at yourself as an agile coach. If you're a coach, you have to look at yourself and see, where do I need to develop in order to step up in the organization? You know, what's my edge? If somebody says to me, you have to go speak to the CEO about this agile transformation stuff, what comes up for you? Are you great? Or is there some fear that I'm not, who am I? Or I'm not at that level, I've never worked at that level. What story are you telling yourself? And you need to get over that. You need to work on it and you need to get over that. Otherwise, you will not be useful to the organization that you are in. Okay, so I have no idea what the time is. Ooh. Good. Any questions? Well, in that case, go forth and conquer. Yes, sorry.
You showed the integral, this
Yeah.
4 columns. Is there a specific way to start with it, or is it supposed to start like in all fields in common?
Hold it close. So I heard your question. So what you asked was, is there a specific way to start with the integral model? There's no specific way. It depends on what's going on in your organization, and it depends on who is involved in the organization itself. I would start with a quadrant. That's the biggest problem. So is it the mindset? Is it the fact that it takes us 2 years to get a product to our clients? Then I would look at the right-hand side. So depending on what the problem is, I would start. I would always look at the problem, though, through all 4 the lenses. Because generally there is an aspect of all 4 lenses involved in every problem, something that you can tweak in all 4 areas. Okay. So by the way, if you want to learn more about that, so I've adapted it for enterprise agility, but if you want to learn more about that, there's a course that does get run in Europe every now and again by ACI, the Agile Coaching Institute. It's called Coaching Agile Teams. Okay. And if you want to know more about organizational agility, there's a class that's also run in Europe and the UK called EAM, Enterprise Agile Masterclass. Okay, that uses some of the other models that I've spoken about. Okay. You can talk to me afterwards if you need detail. They are, so I know that they happen around here. I'm not sure where and when. Yes.
I see frameworks to teach us new behaviors,
yeah.
new approaches
yeah.
Afterwards, so we can change our mindset.
Yeah.
But at some part you said that we can or we should or we change the processes or frameworks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my question is, can we do that without knowing the processes? I mean, we can change, I agree,
yeah,
but
yeah,
can
yeah,
we do
yeah.
that without knowing that? Because it's the biggest handicap whenever we are introducing a
yeah.
new framework or new approach, they want to change
yeah.
without knowing that.
Yeah. So if I understand your question correctly, should we change stuff before we've actually mastered it? Is that your question? So yes and no. Okay. So in some cases we look to frameworks to be a recipe. Okay. So there's a great attachment from us to the framework, and we have to do the framework right before we can change it, okay? And that's good and well if you're still cultivating a mindset. Okay, then it's like training wheels. You know, so change always requires head, heart, and hands. So a framework gives your hands something to do, but actually what we want to change is we want to change your head and your heart. Okay, so if you don't have the heart and the head change in place already, start with a framework. Okay, but once that starts, my ideal world is when we have no frameworks, when we all have the inherent understanding to come up with our own way of working without referring back to a recipe. Okay.
Thank you.
Any last questions? Then I'll say again, go forth and conquer. Good luck, everybody. This is a hard road. So.